Okay, so tonight, the fourth lesson, these are the questions and the issues which we're going to look at tonight. Do I have to believe in God to be Jewish? If I don't believe in God, how does that impact upon my Jewishness? Does that diminish me as a Jew in any way? The next question is going to be, what if I have doubts about God's existence? Is that going to be okay, or does that disqualify me? Why must I fear God? I can understand why I might have to love him. Why have to fear? And our last issue tonight that we'll discuss is, I'm okay with believing in God, but I'm not religious. Can I still have a full relationship with him? Those are questions. Okay, right. You just need, Lewis, would you mind? You just need to press something to take the recording so we can see the people. Sorry, folks, we're just fiddling with. You can hear me clearly at home. Just a thumbs up that you can all hear. Yes, thumbs up. Okay. Thank you. That's great. Thank you, Lewis. Okay, so we're going to start with our first question. Do I have to believe in God to be Jewish? How does that impact upon my Jewishness? And we need to just try and, as always, get behind the question and to explain what the nature of the question is, because most people will think of Judaism as a religion. And generally speaking, a religion means that you have a certain set of beliefs, and therefore to belong to the religion, any religion, you have to subscribe to its beliefs. And in Judaism, believing in the existence of God is pretty high up on the level of beliefs and the priority of beliefs. So if a Jew is not going to says, I don't believe in God, he is in some way or another, he or she is missing out on one of the key beliefs of this religion. And where does that leave them in terms of the religion? So, and of course, we all know that there are lots of people who identify as Jews and would be very upset, by the way, if you told them, if you challenged them and told them that they're not Jewish because they're not behaving like Jews. I've noticed even people who intermarry and married out of the faith, but still very, very strongly believe that they are Jewish. It's just that they've married somebody who's not Jewish. So we all know these sorts of people. And many of them will profess, I don't believe in God. So how does that square then with Judaism being a religion? We've got something which doesn't quite fit over here. So to get to the bottom of this question, really, what we have to do is really, I suppose, understand what it means to be a Jew. And if we can understand what it means to a Jew, it will help us to understand where they fit in the scheme of things. And it turns out that trying to understand what is a Jew is not so easy. There is a very nice exercise, 4.1, on page 112 in your workbooks. Now, you don't have workbooks over here, so I'm going to just read all of these questions. It's a little exercise called "What is a Jew?" Look at these following definitions and try and suggest into which one of these does the definition of a Jew fall. And the first one is a race. Are we a race? A group that humans are often divided into based on physical traits regarded as common among people of shared ancestry. So are we a race? Or are we a culture? And a culture means customary beliefs, social norms, material traits of a racial or religious or a social group. Are we a nation? People having common origin or tradition or language capable of forming a nation state? Or are we a religion, a principle, a system of beliefs? So which one of these do you think, people online and present around the table, which one of these categories do you think that we fit into?
All of them.
Pardon?
All of them.
All of them. That's called hedging your bets, isn't it? That's what everybody around the table over here wants to answer as well. So let's look at each one of these and see what the problem is in relating to each one. And let's start with race. So race is something which we construct certain kinds of categories to define race. So it's a social construct. So for example, black or white, European or African, etc. And the problem with trying to fit Jews into any of these race categories is that there are Jews of every type today. We have originated in the Middle East, but we dispersed throughout the world. Even Caucasian Jews, African Jews, Asian Jews. So Judaism can't be a race because we are a kaleidoscope of many, many races. So we have to discount that category. So let's talk about culture. The problem is there isn't a single culture that defines us as Jews, because some Jews identify with bagels and smoked salmon and cream cheese. Some like herring and vodka. Some prefer a good malt whiskey. Others identify with baklava and arak. Some eat kishka, others eat shakshuka. Some like kugel, others like falafel. Some European Jews like to listen to klezmer music, and Yemenite Jews like to listen to Middle Eastern Europe. And anyone who visits Israel will very soon discover that we are a huge collection of different cultures. And so Judaism can't be a culture. So it's not a race, it's not a culture. We've only got two other chances now. For all of you who said all, you have now limited your choices by 50%, okay? A nation. Well, we can't be a nation either, because there are British Jews, and there are French Jews, and there are Australian Jews, and there are American Jews, and there are South African Jews, and there's Chinese Jews, and there are Russian Jews, and there are Ukrainian Jews. And even though Israel is the Jewish homeland, you don't have to live in Israel to be Jewish. And conversely, Israeli residence doesn't automatically confer Jewishness. You can be living in Israel and not be Jewish. So we're not a nation. Yeah. Just one more chance over here. Are we a religion? That seems to make the most sense. The only problem is, because it's the one thing, by the way, that binds us all, around the world. You'll know that wherever you go, you'll walk into a shul and be more or less familiar, etc. There'll be Shabbat, there'll be other customs, But we've already encountered the problem with calling us a religion. There are millions of Jews who don't identify as religious, but they do identify as being Jews. So we have a problem. We don't know how to categorize us. And a contemporary journalist called Yair Rosenberg wrote on this topic in text number 1 on page 113 in your workbooks. And I'll read you what she said. Would you mind just pouring me some water, please, because the coffee has made me thirsty. This is an article in 2022 by Yair Rosenberg, How Do You Define Jews? And she writes as follows. Well-meaning people have trouble fitting Jews into their usual boxes. Thank you. They don't know how to define Jews. And so they resort to their own frames of reference, like race or religion, and they project them onto the Jewish experience. But Jewish identity doesn't conform to Western categories, despite centuries of attempts by society to shoehorn it in. And this makes sense because Judaism predates Western categories. It's not quite a religion because one can be Jewish regardless of observance or specific belief. Einstein, for example, was proudly Jewish, but not religiously observant. But it is also not quite a race because people can convert into it. It's not merely a culture or an ethnicity, because that leaves out all the religious components. And it's not simply a nationality because although Jews do have a homeland and many identify as part of a nation, others do not. And so, what is the singular item that defines us as Jews? So now that we have eliminated your answer, all of the above, and we have hopefully demonstrated none of the above, what are we left with?
Well, I question those definitions because I don't agree. Because I think there's something in those definitions which apply to all of us, but I'm not, and that's not that's the thing, like shared ancestry, for example. If you go back to Adam and Eve, we share an ancestry.
All humanity share an ancestry, not just Jews.
Okay, okay. All right.
So let's come back to the definition of a Jew. Okay. So we define a Jew, halachically, I'm talking about. We define a Jew as one who's born of a Jewish mother or who has converted according to the halakha. And according to historical Jewish tradition, which by the way is reinforced by the Kabbalah, the defining feature of a Jew, one is born of a Jewish mother or one who's converted in accordance with the halakha, is that they carry a special and a unique spiritual DNA. And for lack of a better term, we call it a soul. So there's no surprise that there can be different archetypal souls. That a soul is just, all humanity has souls, whether you're Jewish or not Jewish. But can there be a particular tweak or DNA in ours which is different to that of a Buddhist or that of a Christian's?
I mean, it's a Jewish soul.
A Jewish soul, yeah. A Jewish soul, one which is tweaked in a particular way to do certain kinds of things, not better or less good or whatever, just different. Why do we need to think that every soul is exactly the same? I think I might have told you the story when I was just about to leave yeshiva and we were talking about 68, 69. Lots of young people were coming from, Jewish people were in ashrams exploring Eastern religions. And there was this young man who turned up in my yeshiva and he looked like a complete and total misfit. So I asked somebody, who is he? He said, well, it's an interesting story. His mother sent him here. I said, well, why? He said, turns out this young man was on a spiritual journey and he had been studying in an ashram for a number of years. And he was meditating together with his guru. And the guru turned around to him and said something along the lines of, we're just not connecting, our souls aren't binding, we're not getting to the places we need to get to in our spiritual journey. And I feel that there's a resistance. And then the guru turns around to him and says to him, are you Jewish? He says, yes. He says, if that's the case, you have to find your spiritual path in your own archetypal soul. This is what the guru says to him. And the guy is basically now flunked out of ashram and calls his mum in New York and says, I've just been thrown out of the ashram. What shall I do? She calls Chabad, and Chabad send him off to yeshiva to sort him out. I don't know what happened to him because I left at that stage, but it was really interesting that the guru himself sensed that there was something different in the journeys, the ways in which we connect with God, and that each one of us will connect through our own, what he called archetype. And so the thing about this is that once you have it, it never goes away. You can't get rid of it. You can't divest yourself of it. Even if you convert out of Judaism, you remain a Jew. See, it's very different to a lot of other religions. You're not born a Christian. You become a Christian. You never become a Jew unless you've converted into it. But if you're Jewish, you're born Jewish, and that's who you are.
You mean because you've got to be baptized?
Yeah, yes, you make a choice. You make a choice to accept, Jesus, etc. So, irrespective of your beliefs or of your practices, the essence of your Jewish identity, your soul, remains your essence. That's who we are. And it's an entirely metaphysical thing. It's not subject to all the conventional constructs of attainability or passage of time, you have it by birth, or if you convert into Judaism, it's conferred upon you. This quality is conferred upon you by God. That is what defines us as Jews. Please, but ask loudly, because people have said that they don't hear the questions being asked.
Okay, so a friend of mine recently mentioned a term in Yiddish, which I have not previously heard of. Since I heard it, it kind of makes complete sense. And I'm wondering if this is what you're describing now, is a pinterly yid.
So a friend had been using, this is the question, a friend had been using a term in Yiddish that Andy had not heard of before, and wondered whether this is what we're referring to now. And the term was the pintele yid. A pintel means the inner point, the inner essence. And yes, that is what we're talking about. And the pintele yid, as much as you try to get rid of it, simply won't go away. There's nothing you can do about it. You don't have to live it, but you can't slough. You can't, it's not like the skin of a snake. You can't get rid of it. Even if you convert to another religion, it's still there. You just are a Jew who is converted. Okay? I'm sure you know of people of this kind. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe puts it in the following way, in text number 2 on page 114. This is how he describes it. Jewishness is not a casual feature of a Jew's identity. Rather, it is his or her very essence. The status of a human, animal, or vegetable is immutable. Declaring that one is no longer human, that an animal really isn't an animal, or that a vegetable is no longer vegetable, is ineffective. You've done nothing. Even if a person will go so far as to deny their own existence or the existence of the human species, it still won't help. And it is not a question of free will. We possess free will over our behavior, our actions, our speech, our thought, but not over our essence and our identity. So Judaism really distinguishes between a Jew and Judaism. You don't become a Jew if you begin to take on Jewish practices or believe that you're a Jew. It's not going to make any difference. If you're not Jewish and you're keeping Shabbat and you're keeping kosher, etc., that the practices of Judaism don't make you Jewish. Okay? You only become a Jew if you have either this spiritual DNA from birth or by conversion. And conversely, as we've been saying, you can't stop being Jewish, irrespective of your beliefs or practices. And, pardon?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Graham has a question.
Say a child is born and of a Jewish mother,
Yes,
and is given up for adoption
Yes.
from day one
yes,
into a, shall we say, a Muslim family,
yes,
and is brought up as a Muslim.
yes.
Is it still, and that's all the
So
child knows?
Graham has asked the question about a child who's given up, a Jewish child is given up for adoption and is adopted by a Muslim family and grows up as a practicing devout Muslim.
Yeah.
Interesting question.
Okay, and the answer is, it's a Jew who's practicing Islam.
But he doesn't know that. The
No, he
child
doesn't know that. No, the point about this Pintele Yid is that you don't even need to know that it exists. Because you don't know that it's there, doesn't mean that it's not there.
Okay.
Now, by the way, it's not such a far-fetched question because, as you know, in the Holocaust, many mothers gave their children over into convents to be saved. And these children, after the parents had been slaughtered, in the camps, murdered in the camps, these children grew up believing that they were Catholics, or Christians, etc. And there are even famous instances of bishops who were Jewish.
Yeah.
And some of them in later life discovered that they were Jewish. And when they discovered it, it was an incredible metamorphosis. I mean, I tell you, we had a story here in our own community when one of the daughters of one of our members was going out with a non-Jewish man, and they came to see me to talk about conversion, etc. And as I always say in the first instance, why don't you do some genealogical checking to see whether perhaps there's some Jewish history in your blood? You just never know what's happened over the generations. And the Beth Din have a genealogist who assists in these matters, and he discovers that he is Jewish through the maternal line. Okay, his grandmother, etc. So now he discovers that he's Jewish. It turns out that he has a brother whose name is George Osborne, who was the Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time. And it turns out, therefore, that this man, our Chancellor, who grew up in the complete total belief that he was a good Christian, is Jewish. And there are hundreds of these people around, hundreds, thousands. I remember many years ago being in business, and we had a traveler, and I was traveling with him, and we got chatting, as one does in the car. We're going on a journey somewhere to visit a customer, and we're talking about families, and somehow we get into the subject of Jewishness. He says, yes. He said, well, my grandmother's Jewish. I said, really? Is that on the paternal side or the maternal side? He said, no, on the maternal side. I said, that means that you're Jewish. I said, don't be silly. He says, we keep Christmas. I said, sorry, mate, you're Jewish. I've just ruined your life.
How did you take it then, seriously?
He brushed it off completely. It was totally irrelevant to him.
Because it would change his life.
It didn't change his life at all. He had lost it.
Too much.
He had lost it completely generationally. Yeah, it was someone else. Does that mean he's not a Jew? That's the point.
You mean whether he likes it or
whether he likes it or not? Whether he likes it or not, we all know this guy is a Jew. You can't fight it. There's nothing you can do about it. It's not religion. Clearly, it's not about religion.
No.
And it's not about culture, and it's not about race, and it's not about nationhood. It's about essence. Essence.
Yeah.
Now, of course, God's intention is that Jews should believe in him and should practice all of his instructions. But if you don't do so, the important thing is you don't lose your identity. And the Talmud puts it very succinctly. I'll read it to you, it's just one line, but it happens to be text number 3 on page 115. Rabbi Abba Bar Zavda said, even one who sins remains a Jew. A Jew is a Jew. Finished. You can discard your nationality by surrendering your citizenship. You can discard your religion by renouncing your beliefs. You can adopt a new culture, but you can't discard your essence.
Are there any other religions?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so. You want to talk about someone? No? Okay.
No. What I was curious with, for example, the man in the cabin.
Yes.
So, for example, you identified that he was Jewish.
Yes.
And he sort of laughed it off and it wasn't going to affect his life in any way, shape or form from that moment.
Yes.
Other than maybe no.
Yes, we have a question here which I'll
So
yeah.
how does that, so he is Jewish,
Yes.
but as far as anything practical.
Yes. So this man we're talking about, who decided after I told him that he's Jewish, took no notice of it. Nothing changed in his life. So what? He is just another Jew who doesn't live a Jewish life.
So no meaning.
No Jewish significance at all. Yeah. But he's a Jew. That's the problem. The issue is this. It's a very mysterious entity. And it's buried very, very, very deep inside of us. And sometimes, as we've seen in history, the fact that this is buried inside of us leads to some very strange outcomes. Because although on the surface, a Jew can claim that he or she doesn't believe in God, this Jewishness is so deeply buried that in certain extreme circumstances, particularly when put to the test, that deeper consciousness and that deeper soul will assert itself. And so we find a very extraordinary phenomenon that is unique to Judaism, because there are martyrs in every religion. But generally speaking, martyrs in religion, or for religious reasons, are people who believe passionately in the cause for which they're prepared to sacrifice their lives. But throughout the ages, Jews, even those who have not professed their beliefs, have been prepared to die for the Jewish faith when challenged. When asked to bow down to the cross, they've rebelled. Now, suddenly, from somewhere deep inside, that Pintel Yid flares up and expresses itself. And I can tell you my own first experience of this was in the 1968, the first time I left South Africa to go abroad and came to London, and I was on my way for my first experience in yeshiva. I was traditional, but wouldn't call myself, in inverted commas, religious. Okay, just an ordinary, nice South African boy who's touring around London for the first time, looking at the big wide world. And I was staying with a Chabad family in Stamford Hill, because they were the ones who had sort of brought me into the whole religious, persuaded me to go to yeshiva for a couple of months during the university vacation holidays. And because I was staying in their house, out of respect, I was wearing a yarmulke. And when I went out in the street, it was December in any event, and my mother had given me a very nice duffel coat and an Astrakhan hat. Okay, so I'm going through the streets of London. I don't wear yarmulke. Okay, I'm not there yet. I don't have a beard. I'm not wearing a yarmulke or anything else. I've been wearing a yarmulke in their house I've been there for a few days, and etc. Now I've got this Astrakhan on as well. And I decide that I am going to visit St. Paul's Cathedral. It's one of the big sites, etc. And I walk into the cathedral, and I'm looking around, and a priest walks past, and I'm wearing my hat, my Astrakhan. The priest walks past and says, "Please remove your hat." I said, "But I am Jewish." So he says to me, "Well, if I was in your house of worship, I would, out of respect, wear a hat. In my house of worship, you should take off your hat." And suddenly, a voice that I don't even recognize from somewhere deep down inside me shouts out aggressively, "Well, I won't." And with that, I stride out, and I find myself standing on the steps of St. Paul's Cathedral, shaking like a leaf. And I have no idea how that happened. But suddenly, my Jewish identity had been challenged.
Yeah.
And something rose from deep down inside me that protested and said, "No, I can't." And the extraordinary thing is that throughout history, there are Jews who have given up their lives when they've been challenged for their faith. Ignorant Jews, unlearned Jews, non-believers. Why? And the answer is because deep down inside, there is a soul. And it hasn't gone away, it's just gone to sleep. And there will be certain circumstances in which that soul might be wakened, sometimes very dramatic. And look, the reality is we are not challenged in that way today. Thank God we live in an era where we're not being asked to sacrifice our lives for our Jewish faith. But nevertheless, you see that people, I'm not talking about religious Jews, but you see ordinary Jews who do strange things. Like I've come across people who tell me, you know, whenever they are in an anti-Semitic city, in Italy or something like that, they deliberately take out their Magen David and they wear it on the outside. You know. Or if you go into a, you know, had to go to a church service, you know, and the congregation are invited to kneel. No, I don't kneel. No, I don't kneel. Why don't you kneel? If you're not so religious, why don't you kneel? I can't kneel.
No, I understand that.
Okay? Yeah.
But you wouldn't be expected to kneel.
Maybe yes, maybe that depends. You know, I'm just giving this as an example that there's something in us that resists certain kinds of, you know, so even when we are challenged a little bit, our identity is aroused. But the point over here is that in dramatic circumstances, for those whose souls are deeply, deeply embedded in them, if it is a question of life or death, in many instances in history, not always, but in many instances, they have been prepared to die rather than convert. And that is unique to the Jewish faith. So the answer to our first question, do I have to believe in God to be Jewish, is that you are Jewish irrespective of whether you profess belief or not, because of the Jewish soul that is inside of you. And it is likely that at some deep level, you do in fact believe, even if it's not at the conscious or the rational level, because it's there somewhere deep inside. I don't want to pretend that there are people who go through their entire lives, even when confronted with their Jewishness, will ignore it, as in the example I've given. But this is a phenomenon that we've seen many, many times in history and continue to see to this day. Yeah. You know, when I was asked to go and meet Rona Rudd, the designer of our ark, who is an Israeli and a very famous artist. And he doesn't do rabbis. And I suppose I should say I don't do artists, but okay. And I met him and we sat down and he says, the first thing I want to tell you is that I'm an atheist. Okay, that's how you start the conversation. So I said to him, you know, Ron, I'm not bothered by that for two reasons. First of all, because by the time a person has reached a certain age in their lives, they're entitled to have arrived at their own understanding of where they fit in this universe. So if you've arrived at an understanding which is different to mine, I can live with that. Okay. And the second thing is, who do you think you're kidding? If you and I were standing alongside us, faced with a challenge to our Jewishness, you would not be able to put a piece of paper between us. And he said, Shlomo, you're right. Okay. You know, the person who says, the Jew who says, I'm an atheist, thank God. Our second question is it okay to have doubts about God? Okay. Well, there are many Jews who are believers, but feel very uncomfortable because they have doubts. Do I really believe? Is God really there? How can I be sure if I don't see him, if I can't experience him? So these doubts are really troubling because they seem to somebody who is a believer to, in some way or another, to cast some doubt on the authenticity or the sincerity of one's faith. So shouldn't a person whose faith is intact be free of doubt? Is that not what you'd expect? Or a person who says, I am a believer? Baruch Hashem, I'm a believer. And you know, sometimes these doubts pop up unexpectedly when you least expect them. Sometimes they are caused by a very troubling event that really challenges our faith when we see things that just don't make sense to us and make us wonder whether there can really be a beneficent, caring God in this world if these sorts of things can happen to human beings. And sometimes it's just a gnawing voice, G-N-A-W-I-N-G, gnawing, in the back of our head. And it's just always present. Is there really a God? Does he really care about what I do? And I recall my very first private interview with the Lubavitch Rebbe of blessed memory. When my sister, who's online over here, at that time was living in New York. And it was my first visit to New York, and I had gone to study in 1970 or 1971. I had gone to study in the Lubavitch Yeshiva because I wanted to find out what this Lubavitch Rebbe business is all about. And I had my first interview with him, which is a very long one, the longest one I had, in which I asked lots and lots of questions. And he gave me a blessing at the end that he said, God Almighty should bless you that you shouldn't have so many questions. And one of the questions I said to him was, you know, all around me were these yeshiva bochurim, you know, with hats and beards and everything else. And I'm just a South African, and they're all dressed in black. I'm wearing something which is very smart and fancy. I've not got the wrong hat. I don't have a beard. I'm looking completely and totally out of place. I'm like a fish out of water. And I say to the Lubavitch Rebbe, you know, when we're saying the Shema, and everybody's got their hand over their eyes, shouting out, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. He said, I hear a voice inside me saying, who are you kidding? You're not like these guys. You don't believe. And I had a doubt. And I put it to him, and he gave me some very interesting answers, which are not for right now, but I bring this to say that these doubts are very deep. So what does Judaism say about this? And the answer is that Judaism categorically believes that it is normal for a believer to harbor doubts, and moreover, it is actually what God intended. Go and work that one out. And I'll try to explain. Because God didn't create a perfect world. We know that. And by placing a spiritual soul in a physical body, he set up an endless conflict between spirit and the spiritual and the physical inside of us. A constant tug. And in creating a world in which bad things happen and allowing that to flourish is automatically, if you're a thinking, caring, sensitive person, you're going to ask questions about it. Otherwise, you're dead inside of yourself, numb, anesthetized. You're not a thinking person. So there's more than enough in our inner personalities and in the outer world to seduce us in our beliefs in God. And of course, it would have been very nice if a believer never harbored any doubts. But it wouldn't have done us any good. We wouldn't have done very well if there were no doubts in this world. And the reason is because in a world in which there is no doubts, we would have become dulled.
Somewhat dull.
Dulled, D-U-L-L-E-D. The challenges that we face and the doubts that they give rise to keep us alive in our belief, because they cause us to ask the questions which either, if you are born as an FFB from birth, questions which you never asked because you simply accepted it, or if you are a Baal Teshuva, somebody who's found their way to Judaism, the questions which you asked the first time round and which you've stopped asking, those events in the world challenge you to ask them all over again and to come back and to find the answers inside of yourself. So these things challenge our faith. And in challenging our faith, they actually keep our faith alive. That's why we need doubts. And that's the way in which the Almighty wanted it. Because if he didn't believe that we could manage doubts, he wouldn't have created us with doubts. The fact that the human condition is one in which we have the capacity to question and to doubt means that he believes in the way in which we're made, that we can face those challenges and come out of them strongly. And sometimes we have to do that big time in the events which occur in our lives, in all of our lives. And if not in our lives, then in the lives of people who we see around us who are suffering, and in some of the tragedies that we see. And it's natural that we should doubt, and it's natural we should ask ourselves the questions about God's existence all over again, and come out of that with stronger beliefs, or with intact beliefs, at least. Text number 5 on page 117 reads as follows. Once again, it's from Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. Even the most irreverent and sinful Jews typically surrender their lives. Oh, I think I've got this is the wrong. That's right. That's the one about previously. Sorry, 118. God gave us the Sitra Achra, which means the opposite side, permission and power to oppose the holiness of God, of the godly soul, so as to inspire us to overcome it. In other words, exactly what I've been saying. See, what we do in this course over here is that every time we want to make a statement, we need to back it up with a Jewish text. Otherwise, I'm selling you Bobbermeisters, okay? But we want this to be authentic, so we're going to always root it in text. And this is the text which tells us exactly what I've been saying. In a lovely story, a certain Jew approached one of the great Hasidic Rebbes known as the Tzemach Tzedek, and complained to the Rebbe. He was one of the great Chabad Rebbes, and he complained that he was plagued by doubts. And the Rebbe said to him, "What does it matter that you have doubts?" And the man recoiled and he said, "But Rebbe," he said, "I'm a Jew." And the Rebbe says, "If so, it's good. Okay, so you're a Jew. That's all you need to worry about. Just go home and carry on." And that was his response to him. You're a Jew? Okay, so you have doubts. You don't stop being a Jew because you have doubts. So having doubts doesn't mean that you're a bad Jew. That's the bottom line over here. The question is, what do you do when the doubts arise? How do you handle them? And the answer is the way in which you respond to a telemarketing caller trying to sell you insurance. What do you do? What do you do with telemarketing?
I can't talk to you now.
I can't talk to you now. Yeah, I don't even go so far. As soon as I hear the click, 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 I'll put the phone down. Okay. Because have you ever tried to engage with a Christian missionary or Jews for Jesus on your doorstep, trying to sell you their story? Have you ever actually tried to talk to them about it? Shall I tell you that it is an exercise in futility? Because you are never going to persuade them rationally out of their beliefs, and they are not going to persuade you out of your beliefs. So you've just wasted their time and your time. You've got nowhere. if you try to engage with a doubt and say, now let me sit down and think about it, you're going to become totally entangled. You'll never get anywhere. And that, by the way, was one of the answers that the Lubavitcher Rebbe gave me when I told him about my doubts. First of all, he said to me very kindly, he said, look, he said, you know, you Shlomo Levine from South Africa, you're still very new, you've come a long way in a short while. He said, you know, just be patient, you know, things will work out. And the second thing he said to me was that when those doubts come to you, you should say to them, because I'm so sorry, I can't talk to you now. I'm very busy. I'm davening. I'm learning. And I've got no time. I've got no time to talk to you. That was the classic way of. Now there is actually on this whole subject of doubts an extraordinary piece of Kabbalah from the Zohar. It's really non-PC. Okay, but I'm going to read it to you. It's text number 6 on page 118. Taken directly from the Zohar, and it reads as follows. God wished that people constantly serve him and follow the true path to merit much good. If this is indeed God's will, how could an evil servant come and incite him against the will of his master and turn people to the evil path and thrust them from the good path and cause them not to do the will of their master? Certainly, this tempter is doing it with the will of his master. And this is analogous to a king who had an only son whom he cherished. And he lovingly commanded him not to come near a disreputable woman because anyone who approached her would not be worthy to enter the king's palace. And the son promised that he would lovingly heed his father's command. Outside the king's palace was a prostitute who was, that's why it's non-PC, you see, who was very beautiful to behold. After a few days, the king said, I would like to see my son's feelings towards me. So he called the prostitute and he told her, seduce my son to test his feelings towards me. What did the prostitute do? She pursued the king's son and started to grab him and to kiss him and to seduce him in various ways. Now, if the son were decent and heeded his father's commands, he would scold her and ignore her and thrust her away. And then the father rejoices with his son and brings him into the inner sanctum of his palace and gives him presents and gifts and great honor. So you see, the Zohar is not shy to take us into some interesting areas of discussion over here. But the idea over here is that the Almighty created the possibility of doubt, like the prostitute, in order to allow us to make our choices in life. Okay. It doesn't quite get that way. It's not always a question of prostitutes, but there is a very an abusive practice that has become very popular in recent times called gaslighting. Anybody know what gaslighting means? Great, excellent. The gaslighting is taken, I looked it up because I wasn't sure, but it came from a 1944 film called Gaslight.
Yeah.
And it's when you abuse a person by sowing self-doubt and confusion into the victim's mind and causing them to question their own judgment and intuition. So, for example, a responsible and capable person is confident that he or she always turns off the lights in the house. Okay? But their partner tells them that they never turn off the lights. And this goes on and on and on and on. And the more the abusive party insists that their partner is behaving irresponsibly, the more the victim begins to actually doubt their own sanity. So what's the best way to deal with this? To engage is futile. So the best thing to do is to ignore it completely, to tell the abuser, you know this game, and I'm not going to fall for it. And Judaism's advice in regard to doubts is exactly the same.
But aren't doubts the same as questioning, which you said was good?
Yes, you do question. But when you question, what do you question? Does God exist? Okay. So I have this question. So what are you going to do with that question? How are you going to deal with that question, with that doubt? What should you do when it arises? So you've seen a terrible tragedy. You've seen a child being run over and killed or something, or whatever it is. What are you going to do when you have the doubt? So it's going to hang around for a while. And in the end, it's going to drag you down and depress you. So you're going to confront it and you're going to say, I don't get God. I just don't get him. I don't understand. I don't understand what he's doing. But you know what? I still believe in him. I can't square this. I've got no answer. But it hasn't led me to the point where I say, I'm sorry, I can't believe anymore. And it's really interesting. People who came out of the Holocaust, by and large, came out in a very binary form. Some came out as really firm believers, and others came out saying, I can no longer believe. I've never encountered a Holocaust survivor who's somewhere in between. Can we go on to the third question? Why must I fear God? One of the first mitzvot that Maimonides discusses in his comprehensive halachic work called Mishnah Torah is the mitzvah to fear God. It's text number 8a on page 121, and it reads as follows. It is a mitzvah to love and to fear this glorious and awesome God, as the verse states in Deuteronomy, and you shall love your God, in Deuteronomy chapter 6, and verse number 5, and in the very next verse, and fear your God. So we're commanded to both love and to fear. The problem with fearing God is that the nature of fear is that by and large, it pretty much ruins relationships. Yeah. I mean, if you're afraid of your spouse, you're probably stuck in a toxic relationship. And if God wants us to have a healthy relationship with him, why does he command us to fear him? Why are prayers filled with repeated mentions of fear? So the American Psychological Association defines fear as a basic and intense emotion aroused by the detection of an imminent threat. And that's pretty much how we would define it today. And no one enjoys being in the presence of a threat. The point is, however, that when we speak of the fear of God, we actually mean something else, not the way it's described over here. And we understand fear as described by Maimonides in text 8b on page 122. What is the way to love and fear God? When a person contemplates God's wondrous deeds and creations and appreciates his infinite wisdom that defies all comparison, he will immediately love and glorify God, yearning with tremendous desire to know God's name. And when he will reflect on these matters, he will then immediately tremble in awe and fear and be aware that he is but a tiny, humble, and dull creature of slight, petty wisdom before the Almighty's perfect knowledge. So Maimonides has changed the definition of fear over here, and he has described it as an emotion which arises when you begin to understand the vastness of this universe and how big God is. The feeling that you're very small, that you shrunk, and that you're overawed by this vastness. And that is why Maimonides describes fear as coming after love. Because if we understand fear in the conventional sense, it would make no sense to say that it comes after love. I love, and then all of a sudden I'm afraid. No, this is a fear which grows out of love, and the love is the appreciation of God.
So is fear the wrong word?
Fear is the wrong word, yes. We call it yira in Hebrew, but we actually mean the translation of yira would be awe
Or
rather than fear. So you just think in your own lives about the occasions when you've been awestruck.
Yeah.
I remember standing at the Niagara Falls and just being absolutely overawed by the power of that water, the force of it, the strength of it. You know, and you kind of like shrink away because it's so big. You stand and you look at this huge, incredible, massive mountain, and you're just filled with sense of your own smallness. You know, you think about the vastness of space. Even sometimes the birth of a child, a miracle. Yeah, and you're in awe of this world. And sometimes the feeling is just for a fleeting moment. And while you can recapture later on the thought, you can put yourself back in that place. Not quite right now, I could put myself back in front of the Niagara Falls, but I can't recreate the feeling. It's gone.
I feel that way every time I see a rainbow.
A rainbow.
It was only recently that I realised it's actually for us.
So yes, Andy says she feels that way every time she sees a rainbow, and only recently learned that there's a special blessing that you make when you see a rainbow. Yes. So to hold and try and capture the moment, Rabbi Shneur Zalman offers a meditation to us, and it's in text number 9 on page 123, and he says, if you contemplate God's greatness and his dominion that envelops all worlds, both high and lower, and how he is invested in all the worlds and simultaneously transcends all the worlds, and you feel that God is standing above you and that his glory fills the world, and yet at the same time, he observes you and sees you and searches your heart. Accordingly, you should serve him with awe and reverence as if standing before a king. Contemplate on this at length to the extent of your intellectual capacity and available time. So his formula here is that if you can train yourself to internalize this sense of the awesomeness of God and of the universe, and that God is present and watching it every moment, and you can hold it in your head as a constant awareness of his presence, you can walk with a sense of awe in the world and feel it all the time. But that comes with training. And that was part of our meditation course that we had on the last occasion. But there's a question over here, and it is this. So why can't we just stick with love? Love is good enough. It should be strong enough to hold the glue together of our relationship with God. Why do we need this additional element over here? And the answer is because there is a fundamental difference between love and fear. The thing about love is that it always begins with me, the person who's loving. In all of our loves, there's always an I that is present. When you love someone, you get something back from it. It makes you feel good to give love. I like to love. It makes you feel to be loved in return. And if the whole relationship is built only on love, then at some time, if you don't love that person anymore, or that person doesn't love you anymore, and you're not getting anything out of it any longer, the relationship is going to be ended, as we see in marriages which break up. Because I'm not getting out of this what I need. Okay, you're not doing it for me anymore. I don't feel it for you, and I'm not getting it from you to me. So I need to be loved. There's always a me in love. But in contrast, in awe or fear, you feel the other, not yourself. In all those examples that we gave, when you're standing in that waterfall, you're not thinking about me. I'm overcome by the power of what is there outside of me. I disappear completely. It's the object of your fear or awe is what dominates. Sometimes even to the extent that your own sense of self shrinks or disappears. And you're so overwhelmed by the presence of the other. And therefore, the nature of the relationship is not dependent on whether you wish to continue it or not. Because it hasn't started with you. It started with the other. So when your service of God is driven by love, the emotion is, I love God. I want or need to connect with him. I want to do what makes him happy. I need. And if I get to the point where I decide I don't need, he's not doing it for me, relationship is over. But if your relationship is based on awe and you're aware of his presence at all times, you feel so tiny and humble. You are not thinking about yourself. You're just aware of God. And therefore, your needs and your desires simply don't matter. So our answer to the question, why must I fear God, is that a sense of awe brings us closer to God in a way that actually love cannot. And even if love expires, awe ensures that the relationship will always continue. And we come to our final question for tonight. Okay. I am okay with believing in God, but I'm not religious. So can I have a relationship with him under these circumstances? And there's a very short answer to this question, although we haven't ended yet because I want to explain it. The answer to this question, in short, is that your relationship with God has nothing to do with religion. That's the short answer. You see, the problem with religion, and now I'm going to get into one of my hobby horses, okay? The problem with religion, certainly in Judaism, is that it forces people into boxes where they don't necessarily fit. So you look at me. If I walk in the street, anybody who sees me, all of you here, Shlomo's religious. You've defined me as religious. Why have you defined me as religious? I'm in a couple, I've got a beard, I look like I'm religious, okay? So you've put me into the religious box. And included in that religious definition is a whole bunch of assumptions that you're going to make about me. That I subscribe to a certain belief system, I subscribe to a certain code of conduct, that I'm part of a community of co-religionists. All of that is wrapped up in his religious. Okay. If I say to you, are you religious? You might very well turn around to me and say, not really, but I am traditional. And as soon as you have labeled yourself as traditional, I have a whole bunch of assumptions about you. So what are my assumptions about you? You're a good person. You're connected with your Jewish identity. You're not necessarily in shul every Shabbat, but you turn up, on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. Friday night is important to you. You're a traditional Jew. Friday night is important. You like to have the family around on Friday night, so that's important. You attend a Pesach Seder because that's traditional. And it may even be that as a traditional Jew, and this is unique to England, you eat fish out. I eat fish out. We have an expression. Okay. I'm kosher at home, but I eat fish out. That's great. That's called traditional. Aren't we a wonderful nation? We can laugh at ourselves. Okay. Now, if you told me that, and no, actually, I'm conservative. Oh, you're conservative. Oh, straight away, I get you. I know exactly what box to put you into. And if you tell me that you reform, I say, by the way, I'll know that in conservative, there'll be a spectrum. There'll be, are you more religious conservative or you're more liberal conservative, And the same you could ask him, I'm Orthodox. Are you more modern Orthodox or you're more, which part of Orthodox are you? But wherever you are, I'll immediately put you in your box. Okay. And if you say that you are, Reform, then if you live in America, the number of variations on religion in America are awesome. I mean, we are still over here. We just hang around with a little bit of, Haredi, Orthodox, conservative, Reform, and liberal, and then we kind of like run out. But if you live in America, you've got a whole. I'm Reconstruction. I'm Jewish. I practice Judaism. We have services every week. We practice a Judaism in which we don't believe in God, but it's great. It's a wonderful Judaism, and we have services and everything else. The variations are infinite. So, by the way, there's a lovely story. A woman goes into a post office to buy stamps for her Hanukkah cards. And she says to the teller, "May I have 50 Hanukkah stamps, please?" And the teller says to her, what denomination? She says, "Oy vey." He says, "Has it come to that?" She says, "Okay." He says, "Give me 6 Orthodox and 12 conservative and 32 Reform." The problem with labeling people is that simply because he or she looks the part or talks the talk, you're going to assume that they also walk the walk. But people are much more nuanced than that. And moreover, if a person sees themselves in a particular box, it doesn't allow for any movement or growth or change. And conversely, it can also lead to a lot of self-justification. So if a religious person, a religious man, behaves badly, he says, "No, that's okay, it's fine. I'm religious. I'm after all. I wear tzitzit, I put into tefillin, I pray 3 times a day, I'm religious." So he'll excuse the fact that he's behaved like a pig to his wife or in business, or behave badly in business, etc. I'm in a box, I'm religious. The truth of the matter is that identifying as religious or as non-religious or any other category misses the point, because Judaism is not about attaining any particular religious state. There are no brownie points that you accrue for acquiring the status of becoming ultra-Orthodox. Hooray, now I've got enough points, I'm ultra-Orthodox, I've ticked all the boxes. Judaism is about serving and connecting with God. And the connection is not done through the wrapper of religion. The connection is done in your next action.
Yeah.
The next mitzvah that you do. It could be 1 or it could be 1,000,000. But each time you do that act, you forge a connection. Text number 11 on page 126. We're nearly finished. When you fulfill God's will, your godly soul, your bodily consciousness, and all their expressions are united in perfect unity with God. And this union endures forever because God and his will transcend time. In other words, every time a person does a mitzvah, he or she forges an indestructible, everlasting connection with God. And there really is no such thing as religious or irreligious Jews. They're only Jews who connect more often, and Jews who connect less often. And the key is not ever to focus on our religious grade or status. The key is always simply to focus on the task at hand. Supposing, you see, supposing you've done something bad to a person, and then that person asks you to do them a favor. Would you say to yourself, well, you see, in regard to this person, I'm really bad, so therefore there's no sense now in doing something good for them. It's nonsensical. In the same vein, you couldn't say, well, you know, I didn't do this mitzvah yesterday, and so therefore there's no sense in me doing it today because I don't do that. Okay, I don't do this mitzvah. I've never done this mitzvah. So you go to someone who's, you know, in the street, Chabadnik, and you say, put on tefillin. No, I don't do that. What do you mean you don't do that? What you mean is you've never done that. Yeah. Does that mean that you shouldn't do it now? Doesn't make sense. So how a religious person should be is never going to be decided by your membership of a group or by a label. When a religious person fails, in that moment, they're not any holier than any other religion, any other person. And when somebody who identifies himself as irreligious does a mitzvah or a good thing, at that moment, he or she is connected with God in exactly the same way as the most religious person is connected with God. And it is a fundamental mistake to think that once you collect a certain number of points, you reach a level called religious, because Judaism is not a frequent flyer program. It's not about collecting points. So the answer to the question, I'm okay with believing in God, but I'm not religious, can I still have a relationship with God? The answer is, forget about religion and just start building a relationship with God, one deed by another. It's as simple as that. There's a much healthier way to do it. There's one more point. It's put by Maimonides, with which we're going to end tonight. It's text number 13 on page 128. Maimonides says the following. It's a very famous piece of Maimonides, much quoted. It's from the Laws of Teshuvah. Throughout the entire year, people ought to view themselves as half worthy and half unworthy, and they ought to see the whole world as equally balanced between worthy and unworthy. If they perform one mitzvah, they tip their own balance, and that of the entire world to the side of goodness, and they bring deliverance and salvation to themselves and others. And this is implied by the verse, a righteous person is the foundation of the world, taken from Proverbs. One mitzvah, one small little deed, might seem minute and insignificant. But if we really look at the world and say, this world is an equal balance right now, and this little deed that I'm about to perform is one little tiny push, is going to add a little bit of weight to the side of the proverbial scale of good and bad in the world. And with this next act, I can finish the job, I can tip the scale, and I can bring the world to its spiritual conclusion. Because who knows what power lies in a single good deed. Beautiful. Next week, some philosophical questions. The old hoary one, been asked so many times. Can God create a rock that is so big he can't lift it? If you can't lift it, he's not God. But if you can't create a rock that big. He's also not God. Okay. Right. Here's a nice one.
Yeah.
Does God's foreknowledge preclude our free choice? Because he knows what's going to happen. Does that mean we have no free choice? Is there anything that God finds difficult to do? And if God decided to do something, can we change his mind?